Hello, everyone. My name is Kyle Hutchison, and I'm joined by my colleague here, Thomas. Welcome to our group demo. We're going to get going here. So Tray.io is empowering the automated organization. Just make sure everyone's in the right place. Today is our weekly group demo. My name is Kyle Hutchison. I'm a sales manager here at Tray, and I'm joined by Thomas Wang, who's a senior sales engineer. He's gonna be running primarily through the demo and answering a lot of the questions. We also have a special guest, Niels Vogt. He's coming over. He joined Tray recently. He's a senior director of growth, and he joined us from New Relic. For today's session, why it's really beneficial is a chance for everyone to ask questions, whether it's related to the topics we're going over today or just general questions about Tray or automation. Feel free to ask them. We have a workflow set up, so any questions that you ask, and it's at the bottom of the screen if you don't know where it is, will automatically be sent to your point of contact here at Tray, so you'll expect a response today. Just for a little high-level agenda, I'm going to run through some slides to give you a general overview of the market, kind of how it's evolved over the last few years. And I'm going to focus a few slides on Tray. Niels, who is our special guest, is going to discuss a little bit about the work that he did at Tray at his previous company, New Relic. And then we're going to spend the majority of today's time in the demo looking over that specific topic that Niels put together, as well as a general overview of the platform. And again, ask questions all throughout today's session. So just to give a little background on the space, it's been called multiple different names over the years, anything from middleware to integrations to iPaaS, and more recently it's been called automation. For people who were connecting back-end systems back in the 90s, you might be familiar with companies like TIBCO or Informatica or even IBM. And these were primarily sold to IT, required very specialized engineering, and were pretty heavy-duty softwares. A lot of these are still in use today, but if you look along that green line here, you can see at the far left, those are companies that were kind of the 90s going into the thousands. To disrupt that market with the proliferation of cloud computing, you have companies like MuleSoft and Apigee, who are a combination of the two, on-prem as well as cloud. Cloud still being kind of the new frontier, so they were disrupting the new space and kind of bringing people into that market. But if you really think about the last 10 years, a lot has changed in software. Cloud has become mainstream. APIs have become much more proliferant across multiple different platforms. And across so many different departments in the companies, you have specialized softwares rather than the platform play, that you need more people to be able to automate and connect all these different platforms. So we're moving to a place where you need citizen automators, people across all the different departments that can automate and connect all these different platforms. And that's really where a platform like Tray is starting to come into market. So this is a report that Kleiner Perkins ran kind of on the internet trends back in 2017. And it really just kind of goes with that hypothesis of the previous slide where we're going into a new age where every single department is going to have more than just a couple softwares. Marketing leading the pack with about 91. I'm sure that's even a higher number today, followed by HR and finance and sales. And if we're moving into a place where all these different departments have so many different softwares that they need, a lot of these integrations that need to connect to the different platforms you need to automate it at a much higher cadence than you would with different back-end systems. So that's where you need a platform like Tray that's flexible and easy to use, but also very powerful, not lacking different back-end functionality. You can scale with larger organizations and you can trust it. So for just to kind of give you a high level of Tray from a flexible standpoint, we can really connect to anything out there, and I'll go into more detail about how that's possible. The easy interface that you'll see in the demo, it's a drag and drop where there's a no-code option as well as a low-code. Powerful, we're working with organizations where we're able to just infinitely scale their product. We're talking about millions and billions of API calls, and then trusted, we're SOC 2 Type 2 certified, GDPR, HIPAA, as well as automatic two-factor authentication, which is full encryption across our platform. So largest companies, Fortune 500s, trust our platform. And today we're actually going to focus on kind of some of the capabilities with Tray to focus on the GDPR. So these are the type of the platforms that we're talking about across these multiple different departments. You're talking about your marketing tools like AdRoll and Marketo, connecting to Salesforce, enriching different data like Segment and Clearbit, and then engaging with tools like Outreach. A lot of these platforms, for people who are familiar with them, it's like the strategies with these different platforms will change on a daily or a weekly basis. So you need to have a tool that can react and move with you much quicker. And kind of going in line with moving quickly and just the ability to connect to so many different platforms. On that previous screen, all those different companies, it's very similar to what those platforms look like in our tool. Those are called connectors. Essentially, you have access to all those different API endpoints. But if you don't have a connector, we can build this for you. And depending on who you're talking to at Trey, we can scope out what that would look like. Also, if we're talking with much more technical users, we have different abilities to connect to all these different platforms, whether it be through webhooks or through the universal HTTP client, also through a CSV editor as well. And we also have ways to connect to on-prem systems too, but just very flexible. We can connect to so many different platforms out there. And just from being a powerful kind of that citizen automator platform, being able to connect to so many different systems, being able to scale, we're able to work with so many different departments across multiple different companies. We're working with Fortune 500 companies like IBM and SAP, companies that have that unicorn title like Lyft and Outreach, as well as kind of all these hot companies across the market. And the one thing that really comes out is that you're able to do so much on our platform at a much greater speed. And so what you're initially thinking for automation is maybe different sales and marketing tools. So like marketing, you might have like lead ingestion, lead routing, and then connecting to your outbound email campaigns. And those are the things that typically take months on other platforms, but on a platform like Trey, when they only take weeks, you have a lot more time given back to you. And what are some other things that you can do? You start to really kind of stretch the canvas, and not just with marketing and sales, but you can do things in the support world or business and kind of automate multiple different functions of the business. So let's talk to a specialist. We're going to bring Niels. I'm going to switch seats with him, and he's going to run us through what he did at New Relic and what he's focused on today. So I'm going to jump out of my seat here.
Hey, everybody. As Kyle said, my name is Niels Bode. I'm the Senior Director of Growth here at Trey. Also, he had mentioned that in a prior life, I worked at New Relic, also in growth over there, and I am actually a citizen automator, so to speak. So I didn't work in the IT department. I'm not a full-time engineer, although I play one on the weekends. But really, the reason that I brought Trey on was that we did need a tool that allowed us to sort of do what I would call sort of unlearn our helplessness. We oftentimes in growth would find that certain engineering teams didn't have resources readily available to us, and so we needed a way, being reasonably technically competent individuals, to find a tool that would help us do things. So while we're going to talk about GDPR as a use case today, what I originally brought Trey on to do was help us with personalization for a really large scale lifecycle practice at New Relic. So if you're interested in that, you might consider looking up our personalization webinar that we did a few months back. But let's talk a little bit about GDPR and how that's interesting from a Trey standpoint. So, being that we ran a lifecycle practice, we did a lot of, we used a lot of different SaaS vendors to trigger things off, right? So we used Intercom to do lifecycle messaging. We used Wootrick to collect customer sentiment for our NPS data. We did a lot of behavioral tracking with Segment, things like this. And when the GDPR sort of wave came through, and the whole company was sort of scratching our heads as to how we were going to manage this process, what it ended up becoming was an extremely manual process. So if you think about getting a GDPR request when it comes into your organization, and to Kyle's point, with all those different tools in which PII can be stored within, there's a lot of different departments and a lot of different teams that have to stay on top of that. And there's SLAs that are required with that. So if I'm recalling correctly, I think there's roughly, I'll probably get this wrong, but I think it's somewhere between the 30 and 90-day SLA. I should know this better. But with Trey, we actually were able to hit those SLAs much faster because one of the things you can actually do is take out the human aspect to managing GDPR deletion requests, assuming that some of the systems that you need to remove information from are open and API driven, which I hope those are the types of tools that you guys are choosing for your software stacks. The openness of your platforms really allows you to tailor them in a way that meets the needs of your organization. So make sure that that's at the top of your list when you're sort of looking at net new vendors and thinking about how open they are from an API standpoint, because it just makes it so much easier to fit into your existing processes. So what we did was we created a internal facing form using Trey, which upon receipt of a GDPR deletion request, the system admins were able to enter the email address in question. And then what this form did was route that email address to what I would call a service-oriented workflow architecture, meaning we had a central router workflow, which would do a bit of, in our case, a little bit of enrichment with our first-party data, things like getting user ID and different things like that, and then farm that data out to a set of individual service workflows for the bespoke software systems that we needed to process deletion requests for. So in this case, what Thomas is gonna look at today is an example of this within the context of Salesforce. Obviously, there's a lot of objects in Salesforce where PII can exist, users, contacts, leads, custom objects, that sort of stuff. And so again, when we're gonna dive into this thing, we can actually look at how you can sort of have a manageable, scalable process and also do all the sort of follow-up, sort of in steps as well. In this case, we'll look at doing that with Slack. Want to dive in and see how it might work?
Let's go for it.
All right.
Stop sharing this one. All right. There we go. Cool. So what we're going to do today is one, walk through a set of workflows that kind of does a subset of what Neil just described. His workflow obviously was connecting to a lot more systems. They had to kind of use the automation to automatically delete users from all systems involved. What we're going to do today is just use Salesforce as one of those service examples. So what you see here first is kind of our main dashboard. So everything in our Trey platform is organized by concept of workflows. You're able to create and manage those workflows very easily, as well as view analytics such as usage. So we'll walk through first an example of that kind of user deletion example working with the form that we created here. And then we'll walk through the two sample workflows that I built prior to this demo. So I created a user here in Salesforce. We're going to have an example of an internal user request this user to be deleted. And you'll see not only will the user, if it's found, it's going to be deleted. If not, it'll respond and say no user found. And the interface that we're using to show the results is in Slack. So you'll see that show up over here. You can obviously use this to send an email as well, or if you want to put it in a Google Sheet or a table, it's really up to you where you want the destination to be. So yeah, saved. So I'm requesting for user by this email to be deleted. Submit this over. Show up here. Right, so you get notified that I requested a user to be deleted. There's within Salesforce both lead and contact record types. So it said obviously a lead was found by this email address that was deleted. In terms of contacts, there were no contacts found by this email address, so nothing happened there.
An interesting, possible, just to kind of spitball about interesting ideas that you could do with something like this. So for example, at New Relic, we use JIRA to manage this process. JIRA's got great APIs. You could, in addition to, or instead of, just depending on your process, use Tray to then update tickets, things like this. I'm not totally familiar with JIRA's webhooks, but you might even be able to trigger the process off from that side.
Yeah, absolutely.
As well.
There's many forms of not just ways to you can have the request submitted through different interfaces, and you can also have kind of the response or results come back in different interfaces. So this example is just using a form. If you want to use JIRA to submit a ticket, or even if you want to have that request come through Slack or email, certainly the possibilities are kind of infinite there.
Yep.
Cool. So let's go through and look at some of those examples. We have two workflows set up. The first one is just based off of a form trigger. So on submission, we're going to have this trigger another workflow, which is the one over here. This is based off of a callable workflow. And in this example, we could have actually kept this all into one workflow, but I wanted to show this example because it allows flexibility in kind of controlling one, kind of what Niels was describing in terms of a main workflow that takes the submissions and calls all the different systems that needs to be deleted. So imagine, if you had to delete in Salesforce, you have to delete someone in Okta, you have to delete someone in Intercom, you can just start to kind of tack on more callable workflows instead of having to go in and make your workflows very complex and very large. It's really up to your personal preference on how you like to structure it, but this is a very organized way of kind of controlling different types of workflow architecture.
Yeah, and just to geek out for a moment, like one of my favorite things about this sort of router workflow that we did was we could tap directly into Redshift. So you can query Redshift with that email address, and you can, again, like decorate that with user IDs from different systems, which might make your sort of service workflows operate faster or more efficient, finding that user with more certainty, that sort of stuff. So that's just like, when I saw that Tray could do that, that was like, I just geeked out pretty hard, because again, like there's so much data that we now have available to us as quote unquote citizen automators to be able to and sort of, and bring that into your processes and workflows. It's just awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So on top of that, kind of expanding on that topic, debugging is also a very big part of the workflow builder. So if you kind of separate out each of those workflows, you can actually see the logs that come through. So you can keep track of, let's say, what's happening on the Salesforce deletion front, what's happening in Intercom. So if anything changes on the APIs or something in your system, it's a lot easier to kind of track where those problems are if you separate them out. Cool. So in terms of the builder, I also kind of want to talk a little bit about the connectors and how the actual builder works. So in this example, we ingested a form. We do have kind of three main types of connectors as well as triggers. So let's first kind of take a quick look at the trigger options. There's a lot that you see here, but mainly there's two types of triggers. One being a scheduled trigger, in which you can run any scheduled interval or on specific days. So it's mainly used for kind of ETL or polling type of mechanisms. We also have a second type, which we just generally call automated triggers. So any service based off of a webhook, we can make into an automated trigger. So these will be happening in real time, and also trigger based on an event. So you can see in Salesforce example, it could be on record create, on content creation, and so on. In this example, we actually use our native form trigger, but any modern kind of form service will support webhooks. So you can typically configure your on-form submit to just have that data come over to Tray. So in terms of the connectors, there's three main sections. There's kind of core connectors where you can build business logic like Boolean, branching, looping, and so on. On the bottom, you see service connectors. So these being the Salesforces that we kind of went through in the other workflow there. But in the middle, we also have a whole suite of helpers. So these allow you to really transform and map data without having to write code. So a quick example in this use case that's relevant is, let's say, you had someone submit an email of a user to be deleted. You can really easily check to see if that email is valid. If it's not valid, maybe send it back to the user to tell them, hey, this user actually doesn't even have a valid email address. So let's look at some of those operations. You can split, and the one that I was talking about was email. this email. So let's check to see if that email is actually valid. And then quickly add logic. So if you think about kind of how businesses evolve, business logic and kind of what you want to do from an automation perspective changes very quickly and usually changes, if not day to day, but week to week. So you can use these things to modify what that logic will be. So after adding that Boolean check, just simply drag your other steps in so that it kind of aligns to the new logic there. And very quickly in the second workflow, this is the callable workflow, which goes in, checks the email, finds the lead in Salesforce. If it's found, then you delete it. Same thing goes for the contact. One of the key things to show here is connecting those steps and grabbing fields. Retrieving fields to and from steps is also very easy. Using our connector snake here, you can see if I want to check if the lead is found, I can actually drag this over any previous step. And the output of the available fields for me to select are very easy to choose there. So in terms of low code, no code environment type of thing, there's definitely a lot of flexibility there. But for any technical users out there, I showed kind of from a usability perspective, a lot of kind of drag and drop and helpers and so on. If you do prefer to write your own scripts to do custom types of data transformations and data mapping, certainly free to use our script step there. The currently supported coding language is JavaScript. So, for any type of user, we like our platform to be, usable for all types of users.
And you can put there's several libraries that you can use within that, right? Like Lodash and things like that.
Yeah. So for ease of use, you don't a lot of times don't have to write your own methods. Lodash allows you to write a lot of things like finding things, looping through items, and so on. So definitely very easy to use from a user perspective. Cool. So I think in terms of a demo, that was all we're looking to show, but definitely would like to see if anybody has any questions, either about the use case, about the platform, anything you guys can think of.
So it looks like we have a question about what happens when you don't have a connector to, for example, in this case, we do have Salesforce, but let's say we didn't. So one of the cool things about Tray is we have a universal connector. So it's in our connectors, it's called an HTTP client. And basically what this allows you to do is to hit any possible system that has an API. So under the context of like GDPR, let's say, as long as there is an API to delete a user, even if we didn't have a quote unquote, out of the box service connector, we could connect to that API. It just takes just a little bit longer for the configuration of the connector. But what's also cool about that is even if there's like a new API that comes along from an existing connector, like you can actually stand that up super fast. Let's say, they didn't have a deletion API before, but they launched that, particular vendor launched that. You can actually just use our universal connector, use the auth that you already have in our system, and then connect straight to that endpoint pretty darn quickly, which is something I think that is also awesome about Tray.
Yeah, just a quick demonstration of what that looks like. HTTP client here allows you to make any REST-based API call. So anybody who's familiar with the product Postman, it's very similar to that. You choose the operation you want, the URL authentication in, and there you go. The other option, if once you have kind of an account manager or account executive that you're speaking to, we also have the option to build out a service connector for you. But if you're interested in some of those, feel free to reach out to your account manager there.
So it looks like we have a question about a possible sandbox environment with dummy data.
Yeah, so in terms of workflow building, it's usually best to test in your sandbox environment first, obviously. So what most of our users do is they'll build exactly the architecture and the workflow they want in production. But when you choose the authentication here, you'll see that I actually have one saved for myself. Whenever you create a new authentication, if the service supports both sandbox and production, you can choose which one you want to authenticate into. So we would first authenticate into a sandbox instance. You can build everything as you would a production one, and as soon as you test it and made sure everything works correctly, all you do is you flip the authentication to the other one, the production one, and you can save that across all your steps in the workflow. And instantly it will be connecting to the production instance as opposed to the sandbox one.
Yeah, so Michael, your question specifically about us sending dummy data for these various systems, we don't currently send you dummy Salesforce data. It would have to be your sandbox. One thing you, in theory, could do is you could basically create dummy payloads. But anyway, that's getting a little bit in the weeds, I suppose. Okay.
I see a few kind of questions about different service connectors. I think a lot of it really relates back into our ability to either create a connector for you or use our universal connector to connect to those. I think for anyone who's interested in specific services here should reach out to either your account manager or account executive like we mentioned. We're happy to walk through either what solutions we have currently. If it's not something that we have pre-built, I'm happy to kind of dive into detail in a one-on-one demo to show you what the possibilities are and what next steps would be there.
Cool.
Yeah. Looks like not too many questions left here, so that's a wrap for today. Thank you everybody for joining. See you guys next week.
Bye.